I think everybody by now is well aware that next Thursday is Thanksgiving Day. How many of you know the date of the first Thanksgiving, or the year of the first Thanksgiving? And who it was that actually made the first Thanksgiving proclamation? Well, it was 1621 was the year. 371 years ago, it was William Bradford, the governor of the Plymouth colony, who called for a day of thanksgiving and prayer after the Pilgrims' first harvest in that colony. Abraham Lincoln first made it a national holiday in 1863. I have a feeling that Abraham Lincoln had something in mind a little more than the harvest, because his proclamation came shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg and about right in the middle of the Civil War. So his thanksgiving to God that year, and his day of prayer and thanksgiving toward God, must have been very poignant indeed, with a number of young men who were dying on the fields of the Civil War every day of that terrible war. When I think about it, it seems remarkable to me in the moral climate of our country today that we still have Thanksgiving Day. I suppose for many people it's much of a vestigial organ, as it were, of the body politic, rather than something that people take seriously. But you know, with Supreme Court decisions being made about prayer in school, and then of course everybody tries to decide to have a moment of silence in school, and along comes court decision that says, no, you can't even have the moment of silence in school for prayer, because they're so determined to stamp out any reference to God or religion. Of course, the idea is, well, whose religion is it? If we're going to allow prayer in school, is it going to be a Christian prayer or a Muslim prayer, or will it be a Buddhist prayer? Or if it's going to be a Christian prayer, which particular kind of Christian prayer will it be? Will it be Unitarian? Will it be Catholic? Will it be Protestant? If it's going to be Protestant, what will it be? Will it be Baptist or Church of Christ? So in the interest of us being fair about religion, let's just get God out of the picture entirely, which we have as a people been systematically doing for a long, long time now. As I say, given that, it's kind of remarkable that we still have Thanksgiving, because the very expression Thanksgiving implies that you're giving thanks to somebody for something. And the whole idea is, one, that we are thanking God for our country, thanking God for peace, thanking God for our wealth, thanking God for what we have. We actually acknowledge that we have what we have, that we are what we are because of God. That's what Thanksgiving is all about. It's a statement that we don't have this because we have earned it. We don't have all these things and these blessings by right. We have them by blessing of God, and therefore thanks is due for it. Without thanksgiving, what are we? What kind of people are we? Without thanksgiving, without the acknowledgement of God, of who He is, and of who we are. I don't remember who it was that said it, but someone once said that the sin of ingratitude is probably the most debilitating and the most wretched sin of all. I would like you to turn back to the first chapter of Romans, because there's a fascinating little byplay here, or the extension of a statement and argument here that's worth thinking about with Thanksgiving Day approaching. In Romans, the very first chapter, verse 18, Paul wrote to the Romans, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." It's interesting, your authorized version of the Bible says they hold the truth. The Greek word means suppress. We're talking about people who had the truth, knew the truth, have every reason in the world to understand the truth, and yet who stood on it, suppress it, either in their own minds or in the body politic to keep people from knowing it. Men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them or to them, because God has shown it to them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power, His Godhead, so that they are without excuse. He is saying that mankind, be he Greek, be he Roman, be he Hebrew, has every reason in the world to know that God is. And not only to know that God is, to know the kind of God that is. that God is a great God, that He is a law-giving God, that there are standards of right and wrong, and men in all civilizations have a pretty good idea, an amazing amount of agreement about the difference between right and wrong in human behavior. In verse 21 it says, because that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Fundamental to the whole question is that they did not glorify God as God, and that they were not thankful. Now, what does that mean to you? What does it say? To me, the connection is as clear as anything could be. That in the process of acknowledging that God is, acknowledging that He is the creator of everything that you see here, acknowledging that He is allowing you to live here in this creation, that He not only created everything you see, but He also created you and created man, and that we owe our very existence to His sufferance, to His permission of our being here. That even if you do not understand that God made man with a purpose in mind, with a goal, at least the understanding that God is and that He did make the world and made man in it, leads naturally, just totally naturally, to thankfulness. Thank you for what you've given me. Thank you for what I am. Thank you for my freedom. Thank you for my health. Thank you for the love that I share with people around me. They did not recognize or acknowledge Him as God, as supreme, as ruler, but rather their foolish heart was darkened. And it never occurred to them, I suppose, that they should ever be thankful for anything. We're talking about a mindset. It's a mindset that says the things that I have are mine because I have earned them. The things that I am able to do, I have a right to do. And no one may deny me the right to do these things. And so this mindset of, I am entitled to this, I have a right to that, I deserve this, I have this coming, leads to a frame of mind that says, why should I give thanks to anyone? Who is God? Why should I concern myself with God? I earned it. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. That's where it all starts. Because men, generally speaking, remake God in their own image. You know, God must be a lot like me. So that white men generally think of God as being white. And I think many black men for a long time thought of God as being white until somebody finally poked him in the ribs one day and says, wait a minute, how do you know God is white? And indeed, how do you know that God is white? Of course, God is neither white nor black nor yellow nor anything of the sort. His face shines like the sun in its full strength, and color has no meaning when you're talking about God. But the fact of the matter is that we tend to remake God in our own image. We say to ourselves, well, I don't think God would mind if I steal this. I don't think God will mind if I sleep with my neighbor's wife. We completely rewrite the law of God. We rewrite God's character to suit ourselves. God is like we are. And therefore, since He hadn't slapped me down for the things that I have done, well, He must approve of the things that I have done. They changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. So God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. They changed the truth of God into a lie, and they worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause, God gave them up to vile affections. Even their women did change the natural use for that which is against nature, and likewise the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was appropriate. In other words, all this stuff started out, folks. All this started out from the simple beginning of refusing to acknowledge God as God and to be thankful to Him as God. To look at Him as the source. The assumption that I know, that I am right, that I have rights, that I have entitlements, this assumption and this accruing to ourselves all of these rights, and the right to decide on a life choice, on a lifestyle. If we can make up our mind whether being homosexual is a lifestyle or an affliction or something that happens by birth. But nobody, they don't seem to be able to make up their mind about that. But whichever it is, this tells us that as a result of leaving God, as a result of forsaking the thankful mindset, this is where the wisdom of man leads them. They receive finally in themselves the recompense of their error which was appropriate. In other words, sin brings consequences, and it's going to come rolling back in on you as a result of it. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Now, you don't think of it this way often, but what we're going to see here is a litany of the results of the refusal to acknowledge God as God and to be thankful. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Now, it's hard to get your mind around this, but think with me for a moment about it. He is telling us essentially that at the root of this incredible litany of sin lies an unthankful spirit, one that refuses to acknowledge God as God or to be thankful. Now, many parents, I think probably most parents, are at some pains to teach their children to say thank you, aren't they? I mean, oftentimes I have been with couples when their children were there, and I have given a child something, and mother will say thank you, and the kid will sit there and just, without any expression passing, look a little bit scared and wonder, what am I supposed to say thank you, say thank you. And of course, I fidget around from one foot to the other, and I shift my weight and pick an imaginary lint on my coat and all this while I allow myself to be the object of this training session. But it's worth it because children do need to be taught to say thank you. Because graciousness is not the natural state of man, is it? It is not in the natural state of children as they grow up to be gracious. Children are naturally selfish, just like you are. They are your children, aren't they? And so naturally they would tend to be, like all the rest of us human beings, selfish. And so we are at great pain. Say thank you. We hand them something, say thank you. And go through the whole rigmarole, sometimes with some chastisement and a lot of patience to get a child in the habit of saying thank you when something is given to them. Rude children, there are rude children. I wouldn't want to pick on them. There aren't any of them here today. But there are such a thing as rude children. Rude children, at the core, are ungrateful children. Think about it. I have had children. I had a little boy one time. I don't remember his age. He was pretty small. Wasn't in school. I know that for sure. Come up to me and say, "Give me a quarter." And I blinked at him and I said, "What?" I didn't believe what I had heard. "Give me a quarter." And I looked at him just about as rude as he was and said, "No." I mean, he didn't say, "Please." He didn't say, "Could you? Would you mind?" He said, it was an order. It was imperative. It was in the imperative tense, "Give me a quarter." Now, how does a kid get to that place? Now, what oftentimes parents will do when a child will come up and say, "Give me that." We'll say, "Please." Once again, we come to an interesting little word, two little phrases that we teach children. Sometimes, it's a good habit for them to get into, even when they do not understand altogether the social implications of it. Please is a very important word. You know what it means? It actually is an abbreviated form. It's a shortened form, "if you please." That's all. And what it means is, if it please you, may I have a piece of your cake? Now, implicit in this, folks, is the fact that you don't have a right to a piece of the cake. You don't own the cake. You haven't got an entitlement to the cake. It is your hostess's cake. But you say, if it please you, and if it doesn't please you, well, then you won't give it to me. But, of course, you have been taught to be gracious as well by your parents, have taught to be giving, and that it's impolite not to share what you have with other people. And you would say, certainly, I'd be happy to. And you will hand it to me, and I will say, thank you. The thank you says, I realize that you didn't have to give me the cake. I was not entitled to it. I didn't have a right to it. You gave it to me because it pleased you to give it to me. And I am grateful to you because you did. Now, the funny thing about this, in teaching children of this thing, is the importance of coming to a place where you begin to teach them gratitude in depth. The habit of saying thank you is a good habit. The habit of saying please is a good habit. And children need to also be taught to say them in the right tone of voice, in a gracious manner of speaking. But somewhere, somehow, we must go beyond the habit of saying thank you and please. Now, what I mean by this is, and I thought about this many times when I was living in England, because in stores, all the clerks, of course, are trained to say thank you for when you've given them your money and they've returned your merchandise and so forth. The idea is thank you for coming and shopping at my establishment. I know you didn't have to shop here. You could have shopped somewhere else, and I appreciate the fact that you came into my store. Thank you. I am grateful for that. I wasn't entitled to your business. Now, of course, they can say thank you, and everything else about the store you have just been in says that they are taking your business for granted, and it means something totally different, right? Well, in England, it comes off oftentimes because of the training and the way children are brought up. You hear thank you everywhere, but often it's kilt. The thank comes off. All you hear is the K-Y-O-U, kilt, because they have said it so many times and so often, and so you check out the kind of kilt, and you go on your way. Or in some cases, it's ta, just ta, which means thank you, ta, or ta muchly is a short for thank you very much. And it's often said, they often say thank you very much, but it's said thank you very much very rapidly. And there was even a little song while we were over there that went along, thank you very much, it was just thank you very, very much, thank you very much. The whole song, because of this habit in the world of saying thank you, was just thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very, very much. And in the years that I was living over there, it became almost a joke among us about kilt and ta and all of the ways in which the British abbreviate thank you because it is said so often. But it does make me think a little bit of the importance of the mindset behind the thank you, of the mindset behind the please, and the reason why a child says please when he asks for something from you. The realization that you don't have to give it to him, the realization that he doesn't have it coming, the realization that everybody in the world doesn't have these, why should he? The realization that there are other human beings in the world who have wants and needs and desires, and who, if it pleases them, might be willing to share with him, can help create a graciousness in children that is desirable indeed. We are, all of us, I think, probably in the process of growing up, we're sitting at a table one night and hadn't finished all of our dinner. And we're told somewhere along the way, well, there are starving children in China that would really love to have what you're not eating there. Nowadays, it's probably starving children in Somalia, but it's always the starving children somewhere else that we were told about when we were growing up. It was thrown out kind of carelessly, I guess, but there is an enormous amount of truth in that. At the table, when the child has not finished his meal, may not be the very best place to bring it up. But somewhere along the line, somehow, some way, your children would be you'd be well advised to let your children know that there is a reason why their life is different from those poor children they will see on television in Somalia. It didn't just happen that way. There is a reason behind it, a reason that I think I wish sometimes were better understood. I am entitled. I am asserting a right, is what people are often doing. If you'll turn back to Luke 17, I want to make you think about today about something from a little different perspective. Luke the 17th chapter and verse 7, Jesus is speaking, and he says, which of you, having a servant plowing or feeding cattle, will say to him by and by when he's come from the field, go ahead and sit down to food? You've been working hard all day. Why don't you go get something to eat? I'll be all right. Rather, don't you say to him, you make ready wherewith I will sup, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward you can go get something to eat and drink yourself. Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded of him? Jesus speaking says, I think not. In other words, here's a man who has a servant who's out working in the field. It is his job. This servant, be he a hired servant or what have you, his job is to do the day's work in the field and then to come home in the evening and to prepare the meal for his master, serve that meal up, and only then has he finished his job. Now, when you are paying someone for their job, it's a contractual arrangement. You do the work, I pay you. You go do the work, and I pay you, and we shake hands and part company. Who owes who thanks? Well, nobody, really, because we have both gotten what we bargained for. Jesus said, the servant comes back into the field. Do you thank him at that point? No. You say, finish the job. Go ahead and finish what we contracted for. And then when you're finished, you go ahead and eat and drink. Then he continues to explain. So likewise you, when you have done all those things that are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. Now, by and large, when we do our job, when we have finished that which is required of us, when we've actually gotten to the end of the sentence and we have put the period there and gone back and crossed the T's and dotted all the I's, and we have actually done what we were expected to do, most of us feel pretty good about what we have done. Jesus said, when you have done what was required or expected or demanded of you in this way, you have not been a profitable servant. How do you get then to be a profitable servant? Well, the only way I can think of doing that is to go and do above and beyond what was required of you. Now, let me ask you, at which point in our lives, can you describe a way of living of a person? How he gets up in the morning, how he goes through the day, works his way through the week and through the month. Can you describe for me a point in time or a set of circumstances whereby this person would come to have a right to a blessing from God? Notice I choose the word carefully. I say the right to it. Now, God graciously gives us promises if we obey him. That's gracious of him. But the promises are grace. They are not a right. Do you understand the difference that existed there? A man who has just lost his job, and I've actually seen this in letters come in. Man just lost his job, complains, I don't understand it. I've kept the Sabbath day. I've been faithful to God, and I quit work before sundown, and I don't go back to work until after sundown on Saturday. I have paid my tithes. I've gone to the festival. I've tried to be obedient to God. How could God allow me to lose my job? The answer may be that you have come to presume that you have a right to God's blessing. The problem is that we oftentimes get these things the wrong way around. We have God's blessings. We respond to God's blessings by obedience and by thanksgiving and by gratitude toward him. But we don't gain somehow a right to God's blessing that way. We are simply doing what is required of us. For example, In the process of keeping the Sabbath day, of ending work at Friday night, and not going back to work again until Saturday night, what do you do for God? What do you give Him? What is it exactly that you package up and reach across and hand to God? Don't we understand that God handed us the Sabbath day? That if He didn't hand us the Sabbath day, some of us wouldn't have any more sense than to work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, until we finally dropped. That we'd be slaves to our jobs, slaves to our bosses, slaves to circumstance, slaves to our credit cards and to our debts, and we wouldn't know any better. But God comes along and gives us the Sabbath day and says, here, stop and rest 1 day a week. It's for you, not for him. The Sabbath was made for man. So how do you gain credit with God? By doing what's for your own good. And isn't it true of God's law, really, from one end to the other, including tithing, that it was all given to us for our good? So how, in the process of doing what is good, do we get enough credits up to where we have a right or an entitlement to something back from God? One of my favorite passages of Scripture, which is very relevant to Thanksgiving Day and the Thanksgiving season, is found back in the 8th chapter of Deuteronomy. This is a sermon, or a speech, if you will, that Moses gave to Israel when they were out of Egypt, getting ready into the Promised Land, and trying to remind them of some things that they might be very prone to forget. I want to read some of these passages to you and talk about them today because I think they're very relevant to Thanksgiving, to the kind of people we are, and to our relationship with God. In Deuteronomy 8, verse 1, he says, all the commandments that I command you this day shall you observe to do. Now, why exactly, then, are you to do this? Well, so you can live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and to prove you and to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. Now, it's a sobering thing to realize that God in heaven actually takes in hand to humble us from time to time. Now, what does that take? What does He have to do? What does He have to take away from you? What sort of pain does He have to put you in? Maybe, for example, being strung up in the hospital bed in traction where somebody has to do everything for you. Even washing everything for you. A very humbling experience, isn't it? What does God have to put us through to humble us? I don't know. It's very apparent what He did to them. The lesson is written. But in each of our cases, if He cares about us, and we know He does, and if He is going to work with us, and we know He will, then we also are going to be humbled deliberately and systematically by God as He works with us. He humbled you. Actually, He led you all this way, the 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you, to prove you, to find out what's going on inside of you, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And He humbled you and suffered you to hunger and fed you with manna that you didn't know. And I can see somebody complaining and saying, well, look, I keep God's law. I'm obedient to God. I don't eat clean or unclean meat. I fast twice in a week. I pay tithes of all that I possess. I keep the Sabbath day. Why am I hungry? Well, God answers. He said He humbled you and suffered you to hunger and then fed you with manna that you didn't know. Why? So He might make you know that man does not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God does man live. Are you thankful to know that? Is it good to know that? Is it a gift of God that He teaches us that man does not live by bread only? Well, sure, it's a wonderful blessing from God. And if He did not humble us and teach us, we would not know. So it is something to be grateful for. Your raiment did not wax old upon you. Your foot didn't swell for 40 years. And you shall also consider, verse 5, in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord your God chastens you. Oh, really? From time to time, things happen to us. We suffer pain. We get hurt. We lose something. We lose somebody. We do without. Maybe God is chastening you. Maybe God is even angry with you. But you should be grateful that He cares enough to chastise, cares enough to humble, and cares enough to turn you around. He says in chapter 8, verse 6, Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord your God brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land wherein you shall eat bread without scarceness. You're not going to lack anything in it. A land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you may dig brass. Boy, folks, look around. Are we there? Sure we are. What a land we live in. What a country. What a place. What riches, what wealth are here for us to share and for us to have. Are we entitled to it? Do we have a right to it? Did we earn it? We were born into it. Maybe some of our forefathers could lay claim to having sweated and suffered and did without and sacrificed to get certain things to where they had their name or their title put upon a piece of property. But most of us, we're born into this land. We have it by blessing, not by right. But you see, we come to think of it in terms of rights, in terms of entitlements. And when you start thinking that way, gratitude goes out the window. Thanksgiving has no place. He says in verse 13, when all your herds and your flocks multiply, actually the beginning of verse 12, when you have eaten and are full, and you've built good houses and you lived in them, and your herds and your flocks are multiplied, and your silver and your gold is multiplied, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Who led you through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein there were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, wherein there was no water? Who brought forth water out of the rock of flint? Who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers didn't know? Why? That he might humble you, and that he might prove you, and to do you good in the latter end. Now, this is a long sentence. It started with that statement earlier, now beware, lest when you've gotten into the land, and you've eaten and are full, and you've built yourself a really nice house to live in, and your cattle and all that are beginning to multiply, and everything is going good, beware, lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. The warning is there. The person who does not return thanks to God, the person who doesn't recognize God's hand in what has happened in his life, who doesn't recognize God's ownership of the good land that we are allowed to squat on for some period of time, who has forgotten, man has forgotten all these things, is going to be in deep trouble. He said, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant with you that he swore to your fathers this day. And it shall be, here's where the caution comes in verse 19. If you do at all forget the Lord your God, and walk after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day, you shall surely perish. It's a shame, that we still do have a Thanksgiving Day. And I think that the very fact that there are still some people, relatively few, but more than us in this land, who do give thanks to God, is a saving grace for all of us. But the time could come when we have forgotten God to such an extent in this country that some of these things will begin to come to pass. He said, as the nations which the Lord destroyed before your face, so shall you perish, because you would not be obedient to the voice of the Lord your God. Now think about this, chapter 9, verse 1. Hear, O Israel, you're going to pass over Jordan this day to go in and possess nations greater and mightier than yourself, cities great and fenced up to heaven. Now, if you're just a careless reader of the Old Testament and you haven't thought about it very much, you're going to tend to think of Israel as being a superior nation and a superior people. That they were God's people, and that they were a great people, and that they moved in and possessed this land, and all there were a bunch of naked savages in there when they went in. You do understand, don't you, that archaeology has now basically laid all that to rest, that the fact is that the nations, that is the kingdoms and the cities, the civilizations that were in Palestine before Israel came in, were operated at a much higher level of culture, civilization, technology than the Israelites did. That by human standards, the Israelites were an inferior tribe of desert nomads. a bunch of barbarians that came in. And in the layers that they dig up in these cities, they find a higher civilization has been overcome by, and over the top of it is laid an inferior civilization. You are not going in to possess these people because you are a greater people than they are, or a mightier people than they are, or stronger, or smarter, or anything of the kind. It's not that way. These people are big people. They have built great cities. They are a powerful people, the people great and tall, the children of the Anakim, of whom you know and have heard say, who can stand before the children of Anak? Now I want you to understand this, therefore, before this day, that the Lord your God is he which goes over before you, and as a consuming fire he shall destroy them. He'll bring them down before your face. How are you going to win all this now? God is going to go over before you. God is going to bring them down. You can't do it yourself. You're going to drive them out and destroy them quickly. How are you going to do it? Because God has weakened them. Now in verse 4 he says, don't say in your heart after the Lord your God has cast them out from before you, saying, well, for my righteousness the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. Don't say it. Don't even allow yourself to think it. That's because you're righteous and you're good and you're keeping... What's righteousness? Well, God's commandments are righteousness. Don't think this because you have the law. Don't think it's because you're obeying God. We all know better than that, don't we? Don't think it's because of these things that this is going to happen. It's not going to happen for that reason. It's not for the righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you're going in to possess their land. It's for the wickedness of those nations that the Lord your God drives them out from before you, that he may perform the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You know, there's some interesting thoughts in that. God didn't give them the land because they were more righteous than the people that were there ahead of them. Therefore, if they go into the land and do the same things that these people did and become themselves an unrighteous and wicked and stiff-necked people, what can they expect? What can they expect God to do, or how can you expect God to deal with it? Understand, therefore, he said, that the Lord your God gives you not this good land to possess it for your righteousness, because you're not. He says you are a stiff-necked, stubborn, rebellious people. You know, God has granted to us an incredible amount of knowledge. We have insights into his word. I mean, I studied the Bible for years before I ever heard of Herbert W. Armstrong. But through him, I say through, not from him, but God through him and through others revealed to me and to many, and from me and from others to many of you, enormous amounts of truth from his word and things that we can understand and grasp. And we have been able to grow in our understanding over many, many years of God's word and to draw nearer to him. It's odd, isn't it? But, you know, we could make the same kind of claim. That, well, we've been righteous. We obey God. We follow God's laws, and therefore God's blessings are upon us because of what we have done. Well, the Bible again and again tells us better than that. Now, if God didn't give it to them because of their righteousness, why did he give it to them? Deuteronomy 7, in verse 7. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, because you were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, as the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand, and has redeemed you out of the house of bondmen and from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know this, that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God that keeps covenant and mercy with all them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. And he repays them that hate him to their face to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hates him. He will repay him to his face. You shall therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command you this day to do them. Why did he give it to them? Because he loved them. Simply because he loved them. Why did God give us all these great truths? Why did God give us all this understanding? Why did God give us this insight into his word, insight into prophecy, insight into the law, insight into a way of living a life? Why did he give us these things? Because he loved us. It's simple, isn't it? There's an old phrase that sometimes I think probably should be used a little more than it is. When you walk along a street and you see a poor guy, sleeping over in the corner, wrapped up in a bunch of rags and an old dirty overcoat and a couple of wine bottles empty beside him, do you think of yourself as being better than he is? Remember the old saying, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Do your children understand why they live in a home instead of in a cardboard box near a grating where there is some heat coming out on a crowded city street somewhere up in Chicago? Do they understand why that is so? Do they understand why it is that they live in a warm house, they go to a good school, they get good lunches at school, and they get good food at home? Do they know why it's that way for them? Could they not just as easily have been born in Somalia? Could they not just as easily been one of those little children that are lying down there with flies crawling over their eyes and their little limbs wasting away? Couldn't they just as easily have been born that way? I don't know how in the world the idea ever got planted into my mind. Perhaps it came from my parents who told me about little children in China who were starving to death while I had all this food that I was leaving on my plate. But I can remember as a child thinking to myself, I could just as easily have been born somewhere else. Did you ladies ever read, when you were a girl, The Good Earth by Pearl Buck? Did you think when you read The Good Earth, I could just as easily have been her as me? And were you thankful? Were you thankful? Do you understand that there is a reason why God has given you to your parents? A reason why you have your children. A reason why you are where you are. That God knows you, loves you, cares about you. Without thanksgiving, folks, we are all lost. We have no idea of our place in the world or the reason for it. We have no idea of who we are or why we are or where we're going without thanksgiving. We are wretched, miserable people. Teach your children not merely to be thankful, to say thank you, but to be thankful. There is such an enormous difference between them. Not merely to say thank you, but to be thankful, so that your life becomes an expression of gratitude, so that your life becomes, and your way of living is an expression of, if you please, may I please, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate what you have done. Thank you for the gift, so that it comes not just simply as a habit, but so that it comes from the heart. Why let your children grow up to be ungrateful wretches and embarrass you by going up to somebody you know and saying, give me a quarter, as this one child did where I was concerned? There is an interesting scripture about this. It's all the way down in Deuteronomy 28. I want you to read it today, because the difference in allowing a child to grow up to be an ungrateful wretch on the one hand, or having the child grow up with a grateful spirit on the other, is right here. Deuteronomy 28, verse 47. Because you served not the Lord your God with joyfulness, with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. Isn't that a beautiful way of putting it? To serve God with joy and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. But because you didn't do that, therefore you shall serve your enemies, which the Lord shall send against you, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he has destroyed you. This is the end of the ungrateful man and the ungrateful woman and the person who says, well, who needs God? I don't have to, my power, my hand, I've earned these things. And while you're at it, while you're teaching your children, consider yourself. I want to remind you of a couple of little scriptures that you all know, that you don't even have to turn to them. They form the first two steps of a syllogism. For the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Therefore, can you complete the syllogism? The wages of sin is death. All have sinned, therefore all die, except for the grace of God. And if you still wonder what you might be thankful for, you might just turn back in conclusion to John 3 and verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. To be thankful for God's salvation, to be thankful that he cares for me, to know that he loved us so much that he gave his only begotten Son who would die in my place. I deserved to die. I deserved the humiliation. I deserved the suffering and the pain. He took it for me. What kind of a person cannot be grateful for that? Without thanksgiving, we're lost.